I didn't cry the day my grandfather died. I cried the day his will was read. My cousins inherited the house, the farmland, and the family business worth millions. I got absolutely nothing. Not even the old watch Grandpa promised me when I was a kid. I sat there in shock while my cousins shook hands with the lawyer, like they had just won the lottery. The craziest part? I wasn't angry at first. I was confused. Because my grandfather, Robert Hayes, raised me after my parents died. I was the one who took him to his doctor's appointments. I was the one who stayed with him at the hospital while he fought cancer. During his last week alive, he grabbed my hand and said something I can still hear to this day. No matter what happens after I'm gone, trust what you know about me. At the time, I thought he was talking about grief. I had no idea he was warning me. As everyone walked out of the lawyer's office, my cousin Jason stopped beside me, smirked, and quietly said, "You always were Grandpa's favorite. Too bad favorites don't always win." Then he walked away laughing with his brother. I stood there frozen, because it wasn't what he said that bothered me. It was how confident he looked, almost like he already knew exactly what the will said before it was ever read. That thought wouldn't leave my mind. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying Grandpa's last words over and over. Then suddenly, I remembered something I'd completely forgotten. A locked metal box. Grandpa kept hidden in his workshop for years. He never let anyone touch it, not me, not my cousins, nobody. And 3 days before he died, he handed me the key. I never opened it, because I thought there would be plenty of time later. But standing in my garage that night, holding that old brass key in my shaking hand, I had a terrifying feeling. What if Grandpa knew exactly what was going to happen after he died? I stared at that old brass key for nearly an hour before I finally got into my truck and drove to Grandpa's workshop. The place had been locked since his funeral. It sat at the edge of his property, a small red building surrounded by oak trees he'd planted decades ago. As I stepped inside, the smell of sawdust and machine oil hit me instantly. For a second, it felt like he was still there, sitting at his workbench, drinking black coffee, telling me life wasn't always fair, but the truth always mattered. I swallowed hard and walked to the back wall. Hidden behind an old cabinet was the metal box Grandpa never let anyone touch. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the key, and I don't know why, but before opening it, I looked around the empty workshop and quietly said, "I hope you knew what you were doing." "Grandpa," the lock clicked open. Inside wasn't money. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't even another will. It was something far more disturbing. A stack of documents tied together with a faded blue ribbon. On top was a handwritten note in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. "Ethan, if you're reading this, then I was right not to trust them." I felt a chill run down my spine. I quickly unfolded the note. Grandpa wrote that during the final year of his life, he became suspicious of how often Jason and Mark pressured him to change his estate plans. They constantly brought paperwork for him to sign. They insisted on handling his finances. And one afternoon, Grandpa overheard them arguing in the kitchen about making sure Ethan gets nothing. Heart started pounding. I kept reading. Grandpa admitted he stopped signing anything after that day and secretly met with another attorney without telling anyone. He even started keeping copies of important records because, in his own words, "I fear my grandsons are capable of something I never thought possible." Had to sit down, because suddenly the funeral, the smirks, the confidence in Jason's face, none of it felt normal anymore. Then I reached the bottom of the stack and found a photocopy of a document that made my stomach drop. It was a version of Grandpa's will I'd never seen before, and unlike the will read at the lawyer's office, my name was on every single page. I froze, because if this document was real, then the will my cousins celebrated a few days ago couldn't possibly be. And tell me honestly, if you found two completely different wills after losing someone you loved, who would you trust? Because at that moment, I didn't know whether I had uncovered the truth or stepped into a lie much bigger than I ever imagined. I must have read that document 20 times that night. Every signature looked like Grandpa's. Every page carried his initials. And most importantly, it was dated just 8 months before he died. According to this version of the will, Grandpa left me his workshop, part of the farmland, and a share of the family business. Not because I asked for it, but because, as he wrote in his own words, Ethan was there when nobody else was. I couldn't stop shaking, because if this will was genuine, then the one read at the lawyer's office had to be fake. But proving that was a completely different story. I barely slept. The next morning, I drove straight to the attorney Grandpa secretly mentioned in his note. His office was a small brick building downtown. The man who opened the door was in his 70s and looked genuinely shocked when I introduced myself. "You're Ethan?" he asked quietly. Then he stared at me for a few seconds before saying something that made my stomach twist. "I've been waiting for you." I didn't know what to say. He invited me inside, opened an old filing cabinet, and pulled out a thick folder with Grandpa's name on it. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Your grandfather believed someone would try to change his will." After his death, my heart nearly stopped. He explained that Grandpa became suspicious during his final year. Jason and Mark suddenly became obsessed with his finances. They pressured him to sign documents when he was weak from chemotherapy. They kept asking questions about bank accounts, deeds, and property titles. Grandpa hated conflict, so he pretended not to notice. But privately, he was terrified. That's why he hired this attorney in secret and made certified copies of everything. I sat there speechless as the attorney placed the originals on his desk. Every page matched the copies I found in the metal box. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Your grandfather told me, if my grandsons ever fight over my legacy, I already know which one will be telling the truth." I felt tears building in my eyes because even after death, Grandpa was still protecting me. But before I could say anything, the attorney's expression suddenly changed. He hesitated for a moment and then quietly said, "There's one more thing you need to know." He reached into the folder and handed me a forensic report dated 3 weeks after Grandpa died. At the bottom, one sentence was circled in red ink. The signature, on the will presented to the family, appears to be inconsistent with Robert Hayes's authentic handwriting. I stopped breathing, because that wasn't suspicion anymore. That was evidence. And for the first time since Grandpa died, I realized my cousins hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They may have committed a crime that could destroy their entire lives. I stared at the forensic report for a long time, hoping I had misunderstood it. But the words never changed. The signature appears to be inconsistent with Robert Hayes' authentic handwriting. My grandfather's signature, forged. I felt sick. For weeks I had been telling myself there had to be an explanation, that maybe Grandpa changed his mind, and I just didn't know about it. But sitting there in that attorney's office, I realized something terrifying. My cousins may have stolen more than my inheritance. They may have stolen Grandpa's final wishes. The attorney looked at me and said quietly, "Ethan, if you choose to fight this, your family will never be the same again." I looked him straight in the eyes and answered, "My family stopped being a family the day they lied to me at Grandpa's funeral." From that moment on, I stopped grieving and started searching for the truth. We worked quietly for weeks. Grandpa's medical records showed he was heavily medicated on the exact day the so-called final will was signed. One nurse even noted that he was drifting in and out of consciousness. Yet my cousins had sworn to everyone that Grandpa was alert and perfectly healthy that day. They lied, and the deeper we dug, the worse it got. Then the attorney obtained security footage from Grandpa's bank. I watched it with my heart pounding. There was Jason, walking out of Grandpa's safe deposit room just 2 weeks before Grandpa died. The problem was, Jason wasn't authorized to access that box. I replayed the footage 3 times. Same result. Same smug look on his face. My stomach turned, because suddenly Grandpa's warning made perfect sense. He knew something was wrong before he died. But I still didn't confront my cousins. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them believing I had accepted losing everything. And judging by their behavior, they absolutely believed it. Jason bought a brand new truck. Mark started remodeling Grandpa's house like it had always belonged to him. They laughed at family gatherings, posted vacation photos online, and acted like they had won. Meanwhile, I stayed silent and kept collecting evidence. Grandpa used to tell me, "Never interrupt people when they're busy exposing themselves." And trust me, my cousins were exposing a lot more than they realized. Then one evening, Grandpa's attorney called me. His voice sounded nervous. I had never heard him like that before. He paused for a moment and then said, "Ethan, I think I finally figured out who helped your cousins forge the will." My grip tightened around the phone, because if someone on the inside was involved, then this wasn't just a family betrayal anymore. It was a conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight all along. I didn't say a word after hanging up the phone. I just grabbed my keys and drove straight to Grandpa's attorney's office. My heart was pounding the entire way. 100 names ran through my head, but there was only one person I never suspected, not in a million years. When I walked into his office, he slid a folder across the desk and said quietly, "I think your cousins had help from someone Grandpa trusted." I opened the folder and froze. At the top of the page was a name I had known my entire life. Michael Reed, Grandpa's longtime accountant, the same man who handled our family's taxes for over 20 years. The same man who stood beside me at Grandpa's funeral and told me, "Your grandfather loved you like a son." I felt my chest tighten. According to bank records, Michael had received several unusually large payments from Jason and Mark, just weeks before Grandpa died. At first he claimed they were consulting fees, but when investigators compared dates, signatures, and financial records, the timeline didn't add up. Then came the biggest shock of all. Grandpa had secretly written a letter about Michael months before he died. In it, he admitted he had caught Michael trying to pressure him into signing documents while he was weak from chemotherapy. Grandpa refused and immediately started moving his records to another attorney without telling anyone. He wrote one sentence that I still remember word for word. "If anything happens to me, don't trust the people who suddenly become desperate for my signature." I sat there staring, at that line while anger boiled inside me. Because Grandpa knew. He knew people around him were trying to take advantage of him while he was dying. And he faced it alone. Because he didn't want to believe his own family could betray him. I promised myself right then and there that I would finish what Grandpa started. Quietly, we handed everything over to investigators. Medical records, the original documents, bank transfers, security footage, and Grandpa's letters. Then I waited. Weeks passed. Jason kept acting like he owned the world. Mark kept renovating Grandpa's house. They had no idea the walls were slowly closing in around them. And then one rainy Tuesday morning, I got a phone call I'll never forget. The investigator's voice was calm, but his words hit me like lightning. Ethan, we've confirmed it. The will read at your grandfather's funeral was forged. Closed my eyes and took a deep breath, because after months of doubt, pain, and sleepless nights, the truth was finally on my side. But what I didn't know yet was this. Proving the forgery was only the beginning. What my cousins were about to lose was far greater than money. The day the forgery was officially confirmed, I thought I would finally feel at peace. I was wrong, because the truth didn't bring relief. It brought rage. For months, my cousins had lived in Grandpa's house, driven his truck, spent his money, and acted like they had earned every bit of it. Meanwhile, I was the one questioning my memories, wondering if the man who raised me had somehow stopped loving me before he died. That thought haunted me more than losing the inheritance itself. But now I finally knew the truth. Grandpa never abandoned me. My cousins betrayed him. Within weeks, criminal charges were filed against Jason, Mark, and Michael Reed. News spread quickly through our small town. The same relatives who ignored me after the funeral suddenly started calling. Some apologized. Others claimed they always suspected something was wrong. Honestly, I didn't care anymore. The only opinion that mattered to me belonged to a man who was no longer alive. Then came the civil case. The forged will was thrown out. Grandpa's real estate holdings, the farmland, and the family business were frozen, while the court reviewed the original estate plan. Jason lost it. He started blaming Mark. Mark blamed Michael. Michael tried to save himself by cooperating with investigators. Years of lies collapsed in a matter of weeks. And for the first time since Grandpa died, I saw fear in my cousin's eyes, real fear. During one hearing, Jason looked at me from across the courtroom and said, "You really want to destroy your own family over money?" I almost laughed, because that question should have been asked the day they forged Grandpa's will, not now. When they were finally facing the consequences, I looked him straight in the eyes and answered, "This stopped being about money the moment you stole a dying man's last wishes." The courtroom went silent. Jason looked away first. A few months later, the judge made his final ruling. Grandpa's original estate plan was restored. The properties were returned to the estate, and my cousins lost everything they had stolen. The house they bragged about owning, the land they fought over, even their reputations. It was all gone. But standing outside that courthouse, watching reporters surround them while they avoided every camera, I didn't feel victorious. I just looked up at the sky and quietly said, "I did it, Grandpa. I protected your name." And somehow, for the first time since he died, I felt like he was finally at peace. But there was one final chapter to this story. One thing my cousins never expected me to do after winning everything back. And honestly, that decision shocked them more than losing the inheritance ever did. I know what you're probably thinking. I won. The real will was restored. My cousins lost everything. The story should end there, right? But it didn't, because when the court returned Grandpa's estate to its rightful ownership, I was faced with a choice that kept me awake for weeks. I could sell everything and walk away, or I could protect the one thing Grandpa loved more than money, his legacy. So I kept the farmland. I kept the workshop where he taught me how to use my hands. I kept the family business, even though people told me it would be easier to sell it all and start over somewhere else. Because I realized something important. My cousins spent years trying to take Grandpa's legacy from me. I wasn't going to let their greed erase the life he built. Then something happened I never expected. One afternoon, Jason showed up at the workshop alone. He looked nothing like the arrogant man who smirked at me at the funeral. He looked tired, broken, older than his years. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he quietly asked, "Was it worth it?" I looked around the workshop, the same place Grandpa taught me honesty, loyalty, and hard work, and I answered honestly. "The money? No, but protecting Grandpa's name, I'd do it 1,000 times. Jason lowered his head, and for the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. After he left, I never saw him again. Mark moved to another state. Michael lost his license and disappeared from our lives completely. And me? I stayed exactly where Grandpa always wanted me to be. Every Sunday morning, I sit on the porch overlooking the farmland with a cup of coffee in my hand, just like he used to. Sometimes I still miss him so much it hurts. But I don't carry anger anymore, because Grandpa gave me something far more valuable than land or money. He taught me that the truth doesn't always win quickly, but if you keep fighting for it, eventually it wins completely. And maybe that's the real inheritance he left me all along. So if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's this. The people who betray you may steal your money, your reputation, and even your peace for a while, but they can never steal the truth. And sooner or later, the truth always comes home. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments. What matters more to you, money or protecting the people and values you love? And don't forget to like and subscribe for more unforgettable stories.